Okay, this is going to be a tutorial on how to use the Passport software and Capture One. Before I can show you how to operate them, I have to put a specimen in here so you can see it. So I picked a beetle, and I want to show you basically how to mount one of these real quick. I'm going to do a lateral shot, so I'm going to use my lateral stage. I place my beetle in to the hole, and there's wax in the background here, in the back, so that it holds the pin steady. I'm going to rotate the specimen to where the side of it is normal with the base, which means it's going to be normal with my camera. So that's important because if your specimen's tilted, not only do you have the wrong perspective, but you're going to take a lot of stacks to get it there. So I'll put it there. I'm going to go start up Capture One and the Passport software so that I can have a live view and see what I'm doing over here. Tests. So I'm putting on my live view on my monitor now. I'm going to turn on my modeling lamps. And now, while I'm watching my monitor, I chose the 100mm lens based on my lens selection guide because of the size of my specimen. My magnification is going to be 1 to 1.5. Now all I see is a big blur because my camera is like 2 feet away. So as I bring my camera down, my specimen starts to come into focus, and I get it roughly in focus with moving the copy stand down. And now I can orient it to where it's centered within my field of view, and everything is happy. My rail has about 50% travel from center on each side, so I know I can move it up or down. I'm going to add the bellows diffuser to this mix because this is the light modifier I would prefer to use for a shiny metallic beetle. It works really well, especially with the 100mm and 65mm lenses. So I'll put that in there. And that's it. I think I've got everything situated just about where I need it. Now I'm going to go over to the rest of this video is going to be focused on the screen. I'm going to be going through the software and seeing how the lights work and how the motors work. I'll be describing this as I go. Okay. All right, we're ready to start now with, we'll open up the Capture One and the Passport software. Now that we have our specimen positioned on the mount, we'll double click on the Passport. We'll select Take Pictures, and I'm going to reduce the main screen there, title screen, bring this up over to my left, and I'm going to start Capture One. Now we can start Capture One either by double clicking on the icon on the taskbar or by using our hotkey on our keyboard, which is MX2. In this case, I'm going to open up the shortcuts to the Capture One sessions, and I'm going to pick the one that I was working on, Roy's Tests, and I'm going to open that up. This is how you would pick out your Capture One session with your name on it. I'll show you how to make a new one. It's real simple. You just go File, New Session, and rename it, and I'll call it New Session. And that's all there is to it. Leave everything else to its default values. Hit OK. The current session will close, and the new session, see, new session, will start up. So now we're all set. We've mounted our specimen. We've decided what lens we're going to use. We know what mag we're running, so let's get that set. With the 100mm lens, we're going to shoot at f8. Our mag is going to be 1 to 1.5. Now, I've opted for f8 because I can get reasonably fine resolution with this with an extended depth of field. And you'll see at about half the amount of slices that I would incur if I were doing f5.6. I'm doing this because I want to demonstrate the process of stacking. I don't want to go through and get a cover shot. I'm looking for something that's going to work right. So here we are. Those are those settings. We're going to now turn on our live view and get everything set. Before we do that, I wanted to go over some basic settings in Capture One. Starting with this one right here, the camera tab, the capture tab. The way we have things set up is it's the name and the camera counter. Now the name of our session is New Session. Your session will have its own name on it. So when the images come in, they're going to have the name and a camera counter. You can select any number of different ways to name the incoming image. It really doesn't matter because the exported image is the one you care about. So if you wanted to keep this even shorter and just take the name off of it, you could highlight it, delete, and just use the camera counter. You're okay. So now you've just got the camera counter. So here's your sample. That's it. I'm going to go ahead and let's see, the ICC profile is default, orientation is default. Metadata and other adjustments you're going to copy from the last so that if I make an adjustment on an image, it's going to carry that to the next image. So it's going to copy from the last image. That's important. And that goes for white balance and sharpening. So if you get something dialed in, all your next images are going to have that same adjustment. This below here is your camera control. Here's your camera. This is your ISO, your f-stop, your shutter speed, your f-stop, your metering. This is your live view for video. This is your fire button. This showing you what kind of image you're producing. It's totally just a raw image. You're on auto white balance. These are all the camera settings that you can change. You can damn near write software for this camera with all these settings. You really don't have to mess with any of this. The camera is preset for you. Going into the next one, you got lenses. When I shoot, let me shoot an image so you can see what I'm talking about. By the way, my flash is set on TTL on this specimen, and it shot at setting of 4.5. So we're going to go in here. Here you can add chromatic, diffraction correction. Here it's defaulted to hide the distorted areas. So if you have a spherical distortion, it'll hide that. Chromatic aberration correction, that's in there. You can shoot with these on or off, but this is a formula based on this particular lens. And Canon and Capture One work together to get all these things. It's a really great thing. You can go in here, you can analyze it. Just analyzed it. Got everything set. So now this is accurate as it can possibly be. I'm not going to use the diffraction correction because I'm not shooting where I'm diffraction limited. I'm not going to go up past, I'm not going to go into f11, f16. Okay, what else? Chromatic aberration correction. So purple fringing here. LCC you're not going to use. You're not going to deal with that. You're not going to deal with cropping, keystone. We're not dealing with any of this right now. Let's see, color, you don't need anything here. Oh, the ICC profile. Okay, we're using generic Canon 5DSR for this camera. Let's see, what else? It does layers. You can, oh boy, you can do all kinds of fun stuff in Capture One with layers. Go online, look at some of the webinars that are produced for Capture One. It's mind-boggling. You can do about 10,010 things with this program. You need to concern yourself with just 10. So but it does those things very, very well. In this output folder, you're going to use this a lot. This is, you're taking your raw image and you're exporting it as a JPEG, TIFF, 8-bit, 16-bit, you name it. And that's basically it here, is you name it. So you can do adjustments, you can do all kinds of stuff. All you're going to really concern yourself with is 8-bit or 16-bit. The ICC profile is going to be the embedded camera profile, which right now is sRGB. Let's see. In your instruction, in your setup file, under manuals, I've given you two very good papers, one on bit depth and one on color space. One deals with 8-bit versus 16-bit, and the other one deals with color spaces like sRGB, Adobe 1998, and wide gamut or ProPhoto. Read those, please, because those will give you important information that will help you make informed decisions as to how you're using your images. So for online journals and everything to do with online, 8-bit TIFF is fine. You can make JPEGs later if you choose to. Output. it's going to go in an output folder. You make subfolders accordingly, and we'll get into that when we export. But everything goes to the output folder in your session. So if you fire up someone else's session, the images are going to go into their output folder. That's something to be aware of. Everything is going to the D drive, which is the primary image drive. Don't save crap on your desktop. It plugs up your boot drive. You have a very fast, large solid-state drive for image acquisition and while you're working on them. Okay, naming the file. I've got it to where it's a job name and a 3-digit counter. You can add whatever you want. You can put, let's say you wanted to put the color space on there. Or let's say you wanted the camera serial number on there. You can do all this stuff. And on and on and on and on. All I do is I use the job name and a 3-digit counter. It allows me to put some information up here as far as what maybe the name of the specimen or the catalog or the collection number, along with my lens and my magnification. You always want to put down what lens you're using and what magnification you're shooting at. That way you can have a measurement scale for it no matter where you are. And I'll explain that later. The 3-digit counter keeps it straight so the stacking programs can understand what sequence it's shot in. And that's it. And then this will process your image out. Okay, here we go into the exposure tab. You've got exposure, contrast, brightness, saturation, all the things you would expect to see in exposure control. You also have shadow and highlights. This is a really key, important little thing. It's like the shadow highlights tool in Photoshop. However, here's where it comes in handy. Let's say you're shooting something that is absolutely black and absolutely white. I just recently shot some tiny mosquitoes that were very, very, very dark brown, almost black, and the scales on their wings were white to the point to where they almost fluoresced white. So if you gave them enough light to bring up detail in those dark spots, the scales were blown out. If you reduced the light to where the scales weren't blown out, there was no detail in the dark spots. They were just completely underexposed. So by using the shadow highlights tool on that, I was able to increase the shadows to bring up detail in those dark points and reduce my highlights so I could add more light in the overall image and not blow out the highlights. This was a really important tool. I normally save my shadow highlights for Photoshop, but in that case of an extreme black and white, having it here is just wonderful. It makes the final image much better. Finally, clarity and structure, or as I would call it, contrast and sharpness. Clarity being contrast, structure being the sharpness. And they are set at almost imperceptible levels. These are at 15. You start to notice them when you get them up around 25 or 30. But we crack them at 15 to put a little tiny bit of basically sharpness and contrast on an otherwise pretty flat image. You may want to increase this when you're shooting in ethanol. That's one thing I've noticed. The ethanol is shooting there, they seem to like a little bit more contrast. And lastly, I'm going to skip down to the metadata. Here in the metadata fields, you have all the normal metadata, the camera, the serial number, the speed you shot it, and all that fun stuff. You can also load in any number of fields you want to, copyrights and GPX coordinates and, you know, all your name and information and website and all that fun stuff. And as we had here, copy from last, metadata and all the metadata that you put in can be saved. You can save it as a preset. The metadata you put in will be copied to your next image. So that's something that's important to manage. In your manuals, there is a beautiful paper written by Jeff Thompson about how to manage metadata. It details with Capture One as well, but it's how a museum or university with a collection would use metadata to manage your images, and it's really important. Take a look at that as well. That's it for the fun buttons in Capture One for now. This is all we're going to be using. So let's get in and take a shot. So I just took a shot with my TTL exposure, and my boxes are coming up at my flashes are coming up at 4.5. I'm going to go ahead now. This is interesting. TTL picks up this background as well, even though it's on a spot meter. It's picking up part of this background. So if I've got a dark beetle and a light background, TTL is going to have a tendency to underexpose my beetle. And the same turn, if I have a darker background if my background was black, this beetle would be absolutely blown out because TTL is trying to compensate for that background. So I've got kind of a place to go. TTL is a great place to get you on paper. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get this thing dialed in a little closer. So I'm going to take it off of TTL and I'm going to put it on manual mode. And I'm going to increase my flash up to 4.7 as it was at 4.5. Now watch my histogram here. It should jump a little to the right. Okay, so here is my previous one, and here's my next one. Well, that's where I want it. So I'm going to shoot it at 4.7. I'm also going to white balance this. So I go up to my white balance picker, and because I'm shooting on a Pantone neutral gray background, I just simply click the background, and that's it. It's absolutely white balance. It's color correct. Now, you want to check your white balance with every different kind of light modifier because each modifier gives you a different color. The bellows diffuser is a warmer color. The softbox may be a cooler color. A bounce light off your ceiling, depending on how cruddy your ceiling is, will be a different color. Also, when you're doing bounce light, it picks up reflected color from objects around the room, including the clothes you wear. So if you're wearing a bright red shirt and you're doing bounce light, guess what you're doing? You're adding red to that image. So if you've got green walls or blue walls and you're bouncing off the ceiling, you're gonna incorporate some of that color. So unless you're shooting in a studio, be mindful. White balance every time with bounce light. Okay, enough chatter. I'm going to get on to shooting this thing. So we're going to delete this one with the permanent delete key. I've made you delete keys, a bunch of keys for Capture One. Oh, let me go through this real quick. Let me take another couple shots. Okay, so now I've got a few images floating around. Your keys for Capture One, your hotkeys I made you are MX6 through MX10. They're on the left-hand side of your keyboard. The first one, MX6, is called Comp, on and off. And what that is it's camera composition mode. You see these watermarks that just appeared on the file. As I shoot, I'll get one more. And then now as I shoot, I'm not going to get any more. I'm going to keep my 6 thumbnails. No matter how many images I shoot, I'm never going to have more than 6 thumbnails. So what this is doing is it's allowing me to analyze adjustments that are made on the fly. If I'm moving my lights around, trying to get rid of a highlight, or trying to light up, a void, or if I'm, whatever I might be doing, and I don't want to accumulate a bunch of thumbnails, I use composition mode. It just lets me work on that one image. It replaces the previous image with this one. Of course, if I need to compare my images, I don't want to use comp mode. And also be mindful, turn composition mode off before you try and do a stack. Otherwise, you'll end up with 30 shots of one image. So anyway, the M6 key turns it on, turns it off, turns it on, turns it off. I use comp mode a lot. You may not use it. You can deactivate that key if you choose to. I've got another one, MX7. It's called Select All. See all these just popped in? So if I pop one, hit MX7, boop, it's just like hitting Control A. Okay, that's all it is. Instead of having to hit 2 keys, you just hit 1. And then I've got MX8, it's the export key. So if I hit that, my export window pops up and I can get all my stuff out there. Now I have 2 delete keys, and this is very, very important. I have delete and delete all. Now when you delete an image from Capture One, you could use the regular delete key on your keyboard, and what that does is it throws it in the trash bin in your folder. So remember over here, these are your folders. You have a trash folder, and it will throw it in your trash folder. You'll never remember to empty it out, but there's a reason for that. Let me get to it. If you want to permanently delete an image, you would hit Alt and the delete key, and you get this little box that comes up that says, are you sure you want to absolutely delete this from disk? And you would hit Enter, yes. Okay, so what I've done is on my MX9 delete key, it's a macro that basically goes Alt, Delete, Enter. So if I click it, it just disappears. It doesn't give you a warning. That's it. Now, why would you have 2 delete keys that way? If you did a white balance on this, which I'll do on my last one. Do my white balance. Now that information's staying with this image. If I delete from disk, that information's gone. But if I just use my delete key and delete this, the image, the thumbnail is gone, but the information that Capture One uses to apply the effects is still there. So if I did a little extra sharpening, if I did my white balance, it will apply it to all my next images. So here's what I recommend you do. After you've done a series of stacks like this, you can simply take this one, the last one with the white balance, that's correct, and use your regular keyboard delete key. That's the one on the right-hand side of your keyboard. And then whatever's left over, you can go down here on the keyboard on the left-hand side to MX10 and hit delete all. And it does Control A, Alt Delete, Enter with one keystroke. So they're gone. Be mindful, if you've done a stack, don't hit that key because you'll have to redo the whole stack because it doesn't care, it doesn't warn you, it's just gone. It's out. So let's go in here, put on Live View again. Now that we've established our exposure, we just have to find the top and bottom. So we make sure we've got our camera set at 100 millimeter, f8, 1 to 1.5. We're at f8 here. These two have to be the same. This tells the stacking program how much depth of field it has based on f8. Well, this is the f8. This is what the camera's actually shooting at in here. This is assuming that the camera is shooting at f8. So if you had this set at f5.6 and this set at f8, the stacking program then thinks that you have minimal depth of field when in fact you have a lot. So it's going to command you to stack lots and lots of images for a given distance that you don't need. Also, if you had this set at f8 and you had this set at f5.6, you would have very little depth of field relative to f8, but your stacking program thinks you have lots of depth of field. So you'd end up with banding on your image. So these two have to be the same. Make sure of that. Otherwise, things don't work very well. Okay, let's go down and find our start and stop point. I go down to the bottom first because the camera starts at the top. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down. I just hit the set button by mistake. I go down to the bottom. I'm going to double click on my Live View, which brings it into 100%. And watch as I go down. You'll see that leg come into focus. I'm going to actually turn on some modeling lamps. We're doing this in the dark. Okay. It'll auto gain. Now we're going to go down a little bit. I'm going to let it figure out what color temperature it needs to be. Okay. Now I'm going to zoom in. Okay. So this is my lowest point, and I'm going to say stop here. Okay, now I got to find my top point. So I'm going to bring it up. You know, I forget how good the gain is on these cameras, and sometimes I absolutely forget my modeling light. I've got enough ambient room light to do it. But it's always best to use your modeling lamps. So see, I'm raising this up now. I started down here. I'm raising this up, and I can see it starting to come into focus. And now everything's just starting to fall off. So now I know I've gone beyond my uppermost point, and that's great. I'm going to hit start here. I'm going to go a little further than I need. I can always get rid of it if it's got no useful data in it. I can look at my thumbnail before I stack it. So I'm going to close this out. Now another thing that's really important, when you're using your handheld remote, if you're going to use it to control your modeling lights, make sure your mode is on TTL, because if it's set to manual, you're going to mess with these lights and you're going to end up changing them over what you think you have them. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and hit start. Oh, the last thing I'm going to do, overlap. I'm going to set that to 0. Leave it at 0. That's the default. It actually is about a 5% overlap. You would want to increase the overlap if you were doing some critical work. For instance, if you were I'll give you an example. If you were photographing something like an emery board on a 45-degree angle at a high mag, and you found that you had a little bit of banding in it where the slices were not perfectly sharp with each other, you would increase the overlap. Conversely, you could have something like a spider with all kinds of gnarly three-dimensional stuff on it and find out that you could get away with a minus overlap of 20% and be just fine. So it's a subjective thing. Leave it at 0. It leaves you with a good solid 5% overlap. The dwell, I'm going to set to a second or 1,000 milliseconds. So by setting it to a 1 second shot, it is going to set me up to where I've got only a 1 second delay between shots. By the way, I've got to set this to 1 to 1.5. Okay, so it's going to take 13 shots to do this, or 13 steps, which will be 14 shots. And that's it. So it's gonna settle down only 1 second between shots, and that's because your flash is a very fast duration at this low power. The reason the default is at 3 seconds, these flash heads at 100% output require 3 seconds to recycle. So that way you're not going to step on your own feet. So when you're shooting at low power like this, feel free to minimize the dwell. Sometimes if you're shooting in ethanol and you've got some ganky petri dish with lots of ethanol sloshing around, you might want to give it a 4 or 5 second dwell so it has time for everything to settle down. Anyway, let's go ahead and shoot. I'm going to turn off my modeling lights now. I don't want them on when I'm firing. And I'm going to hit start. The live view must be in the off position when you start your stack. Otherwise, the flash won't fire. Okay, there are our images, and if we go up here, we can see 14 images were crafted out of this. So I'm going to go look at the bottom. I'm going to grab my hand, double click it. I've got the bottom. I've got the next one. Actually, the lowest one isn't giving me any real useful information, so I'm going to delete it. Let's look at my top one. Yep, it's got good information here. The next one's got more. But this is fine, perfect. Okay, so I'm going to take these 13 images and I'm going to export them. So I would select them all. I can hit Control A or I can hit MX7. And I'm going to hit my export key. There we go. I'm going to put them in a subfolder. And under New Session, I will call it Beetle. Let's see. Gray. Okay. Green Beetle. Let's call it green. Dash 100 millimeter dash 1 to 1.5. So this tells me, gives me a name for a subject. The fact that I shot a 100 millimeter lens and it's 1 to 1.5. I process it. So now it's going to take these 13 images and process them out. And it's got 5, 4, 3, 2, yeah, it's going to process them pretty quick. So this is taking and making them 143 meg TIFF files. So that's insanely fast. So you can do 13 images in about 9 seconds with this. That's it. For this, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to stack them in Zarine and Helicon to walk you through that process. We're going to do more light modifiers and different colored backgrounds later. This is just a tutorial on how to basically function with Capture One. Now, I'm done with this. I've already exported everything. I'm finished, so I'm going to hit my Delete All key. Everything just disappears. Nice. I'm going to close it out. Closing out that. I'm going to quit this. I'm going to turn off my passport. We're done. That's it. And then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to launch our composite programs.